Eddie Van Halen was listening to a classic rock radio station while driving home from the studio. The host was doing a segment ranking greatest guitarists of all time, and Eddie disagreed with several of the choices. On impulse, he called into the show to offer a different perspective. The host, not recognizing Eddie's voice, heard his critique and said dismissively, "Oh, really? And I suppose you could play better than Hendrix? Every caller thinks they're an expert. Tell you what, why don't you come to the studio tomorrow and prove you know what you're talking about? Bring a guitar, show us these techniques you're criticizing. Otherwise, you're just another armchair expert calling from your couch." Eddie, stuck in traffic with nothing to lose, said, "Okay, what time?" The host, not expecting him to accept, laughed and said, "Noon. Don't be late, I want to see this." What happened the next day became the most legendary radio show segment in Los Angeles history. It was a Wednesday afternoon in May 2008, and Eddie Van Halen was driving home from his studio in the Valley, stuck in the usual 101 freeway traffic. He had the radio on, KMET Classic Rock, a station he listened to occasionally. The host was a guy named Danny Sullivan, a loud, opinionated personality who'd been on LA radio for 15 years. Danny was doing a call-in segment, Top 10 Guitarists of All Time, Your Votes. Eddie half listened as Danny read listener rankings, offered his own commentary, and occasionally mocked callers who disagreed with him. It was typical radio, designed to provoke, to get people calling in, to generate controversy and engagement. Danny's current ranking had Jimi Hendrix at number 1, which Eddie agreed with. But then Danny put Eric Clapton at number 2, Jimmy Page at number 3, and started explaining why these rankings were objectively correct based on technique, influence, and innovation. A caller disagreed, suggesting that technique wasn't the only measure, that feel, innovation, and impact mattered more. Danny shot him down. No, you don't understand what you're talking about. Clapton's technical precision is unmatched. His blues phrasing is textbook perfect. That's what makes him number 2. Unless you've studied guitar theory and music history, you can't really judge this properly. Eddie, sitting in stopped traffic, found himself getting annoyed. Clapton was great, obviously, but textbook perfect wasn't the point. The best guitarists broke the textbooks. They created new sounds, new approaches, new possibilities. Without really thinking about it, Eddie pulled out his phone and called the station number Danny had been repeating. He got through surprisingly quickly. The screener asked if he wanted to talk about the guitar rankings. Eddie said yes, and within a minute he was on hold listening to Danny dismiss another caller. Then, Danny's voice came through both his car speakers and his phone. "Okay, we've got Eddie on the line. Eddie, you wanted to weigh in on the greatest guitarists discussion. What's your take?" Eddie tried to organize his thoughts. "Hey, Danny, I think your rankings are too focused on technical precision. The greatest guitarists aren't the ones who play the cleanest. They're the ones who changed what guitar could do. Hendrix at number 1 makes sense because he revolutionized the instrument, but Clapton at number 2 over someone like Jeff Beck or even, I don't know, someone who invented new techniques entirely. That seems off." Danny jumped in. "Okay, so you're saying Clapton isn't number 2. Who would you put there?" "Maybe someone who pioneered a completely new approach," Eddie said. "Someone who changed rock guitar fundamentally, not just played existing styles really well." "Like who?" Danny pressed. "Give me a name." Eddie hesitated. He didn't want to sound like he was promoting himself. "I'm just saying that innovation matters more than perfection. Technical precision is great, but breaking new ground is greater." Danny laughed, not a friendly laugh, but the dismissive laugh of a radio host who'd found a caller to mock. "Oh, really? And I suppose you could play better than Hendrix? Better than Clapton? Every caller thinks they're an expert. Everyone thinks they know more than the professionals." "Tell you what, Eddie, why don't you come to the studio tomorrow and prove you know what you're talking about? Bring a guitar. Show us these innovative techniques you're talking about. Otherwise, you're just another armchair expert calling in from your couch. Seriously? You'll actually come in? Seriously? You'll actually come in?" "Sure," Eddie said. "I'm not doing anything tomorrow. What time works?" Danny recovered quickly, playing it up for the audience. "Noon. Tomorrow. Bring a guitar. Bring your innovative techniques. Show us all why my rankings are wrong. This should be hilarious. What's your last name, Eddie? Van Halen, Eddie said. Eddie Van Halen. Another pause. Van Halen? Like the band? Yeah, Eddie confirmed. Danny laughed again. Okay, Eddie Van Halen. Sure, I'm sure you are. See you at noon tomorrow. Don't be late. I want to see this. He disconnected Eddie and moved to the next caller, making a joke about every caller claiming to be a rock star. Eddie sat in traffic, realizing what he'd just committed to. He'd essentially challenged himself to prove his identity and his opinions on a radio show, live, in front of however many thousands of people listened to KMET at noon on a Thursday. The next day, Eddie showed up at the KMET studios at 11:45 a.m., carrying a guitar case. The receptionist looked at him, jeans, t-shirt, baseball cap, and asked if he was there for the Armchair Expert segment. Eddie confirmed he was. She led him to the green room. Danny's almost done with the news segment. You're on right at noon. He's really looking forward to this. Her tone suggested she expected Eddie to be embarrassed on air. At noon, a producer came to get Eddie. You're up. Fair warning, Danny's going to give you a hard time. That's his thing. Don't take it personally. He's already been promoting this all morning. Armchair expert who thinks he knows more than me angle. Listeners are loving it. Eddie was led into the broadcast studio. Danny was behind the microphone, wearing headphones, wrapping up a commercial break. He looked at Eddie walking in, middle-aged guy in jeans, t-shirt, baseball cap, carrying a guitar case, and his expression was pure anticipation. This was going to be good radio, great radio. He had a caller who'd actually showed up to be humiliated. Danny's producer sat behind the glass, grinning, giving Danny a thumbs up. They'd been promoting this all morning. The ratings would be huge. The on-air light came on. Danny leaned into the mic with practiced enthusiasm. Welcome back to the Danny Sullivan Show on KMET, Los Angeles' home for classic rock. Yesterday, I had a caller, and you guys heard this. It was amazing. This caller disagreed with my objective, scientifically ranked list of the greatest guitarists of all time. This caller, who gave his name as Eddie Van Halen, Danny made exaggerated air quotes and winked at his producer through the glass, claimed that my number 2 ranking of Eric Clapton was wrong. He said that innovation matters more than technical precision. He said that I, quote, don't understand what makes guitarists great. Danny paused for effect. Now, I could have just argued with him on the phone like I do with most callers, but I decided to do something different. I challenged this Eddie Van Halen to come to the studio and prove it. Bring a guitar, I said. Show us these revolutionary techniques you're talking about. Demonstrate this innovation that's supposedly more important than Clapton's decades of perfect blues technique. Another pause, building anticipation. And you know what? He actually showed up. Say hello to our armchair expert, everybody. Our guitar genius, the man who knows more than everyone, Eddie Van Halen. Danny said the name with heavy dripping sarcasm, making it absolutely clear he thought this was just some random guy who'd picked a famous name to sound important. Eddie leaned toward the microphone Danny had set up for him. Hi, Danny. Thanks for having me. So, Eddie, Danny said, you brought a guitar, I see. That's good. We need props for this. But before we get to your demonstration of these revolutionary techniques that put you above Eric Clapton in the guitar pantheon, I have to ask, why did you give my screener the name Eddie Van Halen? I mean, come on, are you a fan? Is this like a tribute act situation? Do you play Van Halen covers at weddings? That's actually my name, Eddie said calmly. Danny grinned. Right, and I'm Jimmy Page. Okay, let's play along. Eddie Van Halen thinks my guitar rankings are wrong because I value technical precision over innovation. So let's hear it. You've got a guitar. Show me this innovation that's more important than Clapton's technique. Eddie opened his guitar case and pulled out his Frankenstrat, the iconic red, white, and black striped guitar that was instantly recognizable to anyone who knew Van Halen. The custom-built, battle-scarred, legendary instrument that had been photographed 1,000,000 times, that was on album covers, that was synonymous with Eddie Van Halen himself. Danny's producer, visible through the glass, suddenly stood up from his chair. His eyes went wide. He started pointing at the guitar, then at Eddie, then back at the guitar, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was frantically trying to get Danny's attention, waving his arms. But Danny was focused on the bit, on the radio theater of humiliating an armchair expert. He didn't see his producer's panic. Eddie plugged into the studio's practice amp, a small Fender that happened to be there, and without any preamble, played the opening of Eruption, that tapping technique, that cascading impossible sound that had revolutionized rock guitar in 1978, that every guitarist on earth recognized instantly. The sound filled the studio. 3 seconds. That's all it took. Danny's smirk vanished like someone had flipped a switch. He stared at Eddie, then at the instantly recognizable guitar, then at his producer who was now jumping up and down and frantically nodding and pointing and making "I told you" gestures through the glass. "Oh my God," Danny said, live on the air, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're actually Eddie Van Halen. You're really Eddie Van Halen." "I tried to tell you yesterday," Eddie said calmly, still playing subtle runs on the guitar. "I thought you were some guy pretending to be Eddie Van Halen," Danny said, his voice climbing now, the reality hitting him in waves. "I mocked you. I called you an armchair expert. I said you were just another caller from your couch. I told Eddie Van Halen that he doesn't understand guitar rankings. On the air. To thousands of people. I've been promoting this all morning as Watch Me Destroy an Armchair Expert. This is the worst professional moment of my life." "Or the best," Eddie suggested. "Your ratings are probably pretty good right now." Danny looked at his producer through the glass. The phone lines board was lighting up like a Christmas tree, every line flashing, the cue full. The producer was holding up fingers. 10, 20, hold full, numbers climbing. For the next hour, way longer than the planned segment, Eddie and Danny had an actual conversation about guitar, technique, innovation, and influence. Eddie played examples of different styles, explained why he valued innovation over perfection, and gave his own rankings of great guitarists, which included some surprising choices. He played parts of songs by guitarists Danny hadn't even mentioned: Django Reinhardt, Les Paul, Chet Atkins, explaining how innovation happened across generations. He demonstrated techniques, explained his philosophy of guitar, and treated Danny's initial mocking with complete grace. The station's phone lines exploded. People calling in couldn't believe Eddie Van Halen was on KMET doing an impromptu guitar clinic. Other radio shows started mentioning it. Word spread. When Eddie finally packed up his guitar, Danny shook his hand. "Mr. Van Halen, Eddie, I owe you a massive apology. I was condescending, dismissive, and I mocked you on air. Thank you for showing up anyway and making this the best segment I've ever done." "You challenged a caller to back up his opinions," Eddie said. "That's good radio. You just didn't expect the caller to actually be who he said he was." The segment became legendary. Clips went viral. It was downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. Other radio hosts talked about the day Danny Sullivan challenged Eddie Van Halen and Eddie showed up. Danny told the story for the rest of his career. "I learned 2 things that day. First, sometimes the random caller really is Eddie Van Halen. Second, Eddie Van Halen is a better person than I am. I mocked him, doubted him, and challenged him publicly. He responded by showing up, proving his point with grace, and giving my audience an unforgettable hour of radio. That's not just talent, that's character." When Eddie died in 2020, Danny did a special tribute show, playing the full unedited hour from that day in 2008. "This is the day I learned that greatness isn't just about skill. It's about how you treat people when you have every right to make them look foolish. Eddie could have destroyed me. Instead, he educated me, educated my audience, and turned my skepticism into one of the best conversations of my career. Rest in peace to the master who proved his expertise with kindness." If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who doubted you? Share your story in the comments.